generally there's a lot of labels out there for what's good or what's bad.
Right.
And, you know, when athletes are going through this experience, they think that there's a right way. Like, how did Kobe do it? And Kobe did these blackout workouts and he did this and he did that. And I think it's good to have some kind of model and blueprint that you can follow. But ultimately, basically with Play Free, what we're trying to do is we're trying to help people find their center, to understand that there's a still small, quiet voice within you that can guide you and help you make the decisions that you need to make. And we need to get back in touch with that.
You are listening to the Beyond the Scoreboard podcast, transforming athletes into leaders on and off the court with host Coach Furtado. Coaches, are you ready to take your passion for coaching and turn it into a full-time career? I know the challenges firsthand, but the Make Money Coaching Sports program helped me take BTG basketball full-time. If you're tired of juggling coaching part-time and want to fully focus on doing what you love, this business accelerator will give you the tools and support to make it happen. Hit the link in the show notes below to learn more and start living your dream. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Beyond the Scoreboard podcast. Today, we have a great guest for you, the founder, the director, the coach of Play Free Basketball, Jon Giesbrecht. I'm sorry, Jon. Jon helps all athletes, youth, professional, college athletes, just play free, get over overthinking. And so, with that, welcome to the show, Jon.
Thanks, man. Yeah, I run my own podcast and I've had guests and I always say, hey, you know, how do you say your name? And I always sometimes, you know,
Kind of freeze.
I freeze a little bit with that. It's something I've always, but yeah, Jon Giesbrecht. And, you know, Justin, I'm really, you know, a big fan. I've been listening to your podcast the last couple days and getting a kind of feel for the work that you do and the content that you're sharing. And I'm really fortunate that you've made some time for me to get on here and to speak to athletes, but also parents about the role of mental performance in high performance basketball.
So let's dive right into there. Before we kind of get into, your coaching style, I always like to start with Beyond the Scoreboard in terms of talking about how the game of basketball had an impact on you. And then also if you can kind of expand on, some of the challenges I'm sure that you had with overthinking that made you want to get into playing free.
Yeah. I started coaching when I was about 14, 15 years old. And, I played the game all the way throughout high school. And at graduation of high school, I made the decision to get into coaching. For me, coaching was, I loved it because of the organization, the preparation. I felt like I had a little bit more control on the situation in different ways. And it was really exciting to learn the game. And I think when I got into coaching, I really started to love the game more than I did even as a player. And I started coaching all these teams. I was a university coach. I coached professional basketball. I've done all these different things. But it always for me came back to, okay, technically, tactically, we're really, really tight with everything we're teaching. I'm studying people from around the world, but there's still like something that's missing here. And what I got down to was, hey, I think mentally, number one, I need to be better because, I'm probably, I'm not embarrassed, it was who I used to be. But when I was a coach, I was fiery. I still am fiery. It's just at this point, I'm able to feel those emotions and then direct my attention. And when I was younger, I would, stomp my feet, cuss referees out. I was really, really competitive. And I don't think a lot of people believe me now because, as I said to you before, I've got long hair, I've got, a beard, and I used to be very clean cut, on top of that stuff. And yeah, it's just I had a shift with how I saw the game and how I wanted, what role I wanted to play within the game. And it led me to mindfulness and mental performance. There was a lot of work I did on myself, going back all the way to my childhood and looking at the things that I didn't necessarily want to look at and I tried to avoid. And it became, repressed over time, repressed emotions and stuff like that. So I did a lot of inner work. I got into spirituality. I was dating a girl who was a yogi. So she was introducing me to her friends, and pretty much I just started having conversations with athletes and saying, okay, like, does this connect for you? Does this make sense? And because I had the basketball background and I could understand them in that context, it was really easy for them to make connections and make the work practical, where they were seeing growth with their game. And they were getting to the point of playing free. And that's why I called my business Play Free Basketball, because it's something that people talk about, but a lot of people don't really understand it. They don't have a process or a system. They say, trust the process, but they don't have a process. So I wanted to develop something for athletes that would empower them, not only just for basketball, but for their lives.
That's amazing. Yeah. And I feel like that's one of the most important part is, right, you said for their lives. And I feel like when you can really recognize the power of sport and everything that is teaching you in the mental side, it is so helpful, right, beyond the game. So let's kind of dive in to 101, right? Where do you see most athletes when they come to you or you had those initial conversations? What's like the number one thing they were struggling with and challenged by?
Yeah, most athletes that come to me are slipping, they're bleeding out, and they've been in this place for maybe, a couple weeks, a month, a whole season. And to me, a lot of times it comes down to focus, especially with how our society's going. There's a quick fix for everything, for every single problem. You're kind of flooded with information every time you look at your phone. And yeah, I just think there's a lot of chaos, and everything is pointing to something outside of you that's going to fix the problem. But what I've found with athletes is once they look to go inward and they can slow down and actually have someone to talk to that listens to them, then they start to make sense of the world and make sense of their decisions and make sense of what they need to focus on. That is the biggest challenge for people. It's focus. Can I focus and stay consistent and not get distracted along the journey? The shiny object syndrome. It's really easy to get off the path and do something that everybody else is doing, but sometimes you got to kind of bet on yourself and take a chance. And as you do that, you feel anxiety, you have the shots of anxiety, and you have all this stuff coming up. And a lot of people have a hard time, managing those feelings. And a lot of people also say it's very soft to be in touch with your feelings. And I feel like we're just starting to kind of turn the corner on that and break down that stigma. And people are having some real conversations. So it's long-winded answer, but I think it comes down to focus and feeling.
Let's go there. Let's go there because I know we have some coaches that are listening to this podcast, and I feel like a lot of the coaches that do listen to this podcast are coaches who value growing as people. And you talked about how we're kind of turning the corner, and just from your perspective, like for me as a head coach, as someone who's a leader of a program and wants to establish like a place, like a safe space, like a lot of times that's what we talk about on this podcast is creating that safe space. But how can I also, as a coach, create an environment where my players feel like they can express themselves in a healthy way?
Yeah, I think it always comes down to the coach and specifically them being able to regulate and be centered. Like if I feel that you're centered and you're at ease with yourself, it's probably going to be a lot easier for me to open up and talk about the things I need to talk about. And I mean, it could be depression or anxiety and all that kind of stuff that comes up from time to time. But I think we just get so disconnected. And, you know, it seems like being around more and more kids, they're just kind of hooked on their cell phone and their attention is evaporating, with every year that I coach. So I think if you're centered and you're asking more questions and making suggestions as it comes down to it, I think then athletes are going to be a little bit more free in how they speak and communicate and act as they go forward here.
Right. So let's talk about playing free. When it comes to playing free, like if a player comes to you and what often are they kind of looking for, right? I feel like what's that definition of playing free, living free, and just kind of living in that their authentic truth in themselves as basketball players and as people.
Yeah, I think generally there's a lot of labels out there for what's good or what's bad, and you know when athletes are going through this experience, they think that there's a right way. Like, how did Kobe do it? And Kobe did these blackout workouts, and he did this and he did that. And I think it's good to have some kind of model and blueprint that you can follow. But ultimately, basically with Play Free, what we're trying to do is we're trying to help people find their center, to understand that there's a still small, quiet voice within you that can guide you and help you make the decisions that you need to make. And we need to get back in touch with that. So for me, doing Play Free and doing a lot of one-on-one calls with people, it's just, holding space for people, asking questions, and guiding them to guide themselves as they go through the process, instead of getting, as I said, wrapped up with all the chaos and all the stuff that comes with the game.
Right. Yeah, there is a lot of chaos, and you talked about like beginning within, and I kind of alluded to it. Obviously, there's when we scroll between me and you, when we scroll both of our feeds, you'll probably get similar things talking of basketball coaches and mental performance coaches, and then we're kind of we're in business, so we're gonna get a sponsored ad, at least one, and everyone's gonna tell us our solution for something. Right. And I kind of what I hear you saying is a lot of times that solution actually can come from us. We don't always need to search ChatGPT or Google for some of the answers. We kind of got to look and go inside. And so I feel like part of that is just number one, spending time with ourselves, getting introspective and wanting to reflect. But how, as coaches and influencers, as parents, how do we help our athletes go inside and internal when there's so many, shiny objects out there?
Yeah. The quote that I really love that always comes back to my mind when I have these kind of conversations is, the only work that I can do for you, or the only way I can help you, is to keep working on myself, and the only way you can help me is to continue to work on yourself. So the idea is, with some of these athletes and coaches, what kind of questions can we ask to help them and help guide them? And one of the most powerful questions that has come to my mind, as I figure this stuff out for myself, but also help athletes, is, what does my body really need right now? What does my body really need right now? And that is what we're talking about. Like, can you slow down and recognize, hey, like, this is, I need to make a shift. I need to try something different, or I need to do this. Like, for example, like, I'll give you something simple. Like, when I woke up this morning, man, I was in a bad mood. Like, I just was like really, feeling a certain way. And I was able, as I've done this with athletes so many times, and I've started to train myself, I'm like, okay, what do I really need? All right, I'm going to start jumping up and down. I'm going to start moving my body, you know, swinging my arms. I'm going to, chug a thing of water, you know, and then I'm going to get to work, and then I'm going to do what I need to do. I'm not going to avoid the things I need to do with my business. So I sat down and I got, an hour worth of work done, deep focus, deep work. And those are the things that I needed to do. I needed to create, I needed to hydrate, I needed to move the body, as I said. So I think the more you can ask that question, because it's really easy. Like, you go on your phone and you can numb out pretty quick and escape your problems. Just like a lot of things. Like, I when I talk to college athletes, like, you can jump on Tinder and you can start swiping, and that can totally help you escape, what's happening in the world. So I think those are the kind of questions that you want to start asking, is, what do I really need? And then I think, as a facilitator, when I'm having the conversations with the athletes, the next most important statement that I can say is, tell me more. Tell me more. Tell me more. I say that, and that helps athletes, open up. So, like, when I look at an athlete and I say, what's wrong? Nothing's wrong. I'm sure you've had that happen, and
Yep.
and they put up their walls and they get super guarded. And then if you can slow down, say, what's wrong? Tell me more. And then they take a deep breath and they let it out and they say, oh, well, this and that. And, the most important thing, I think, for a lot of people, when you're a coach, when you're figuring this out, and when you're starting to get into mental performance, is just recognizing that everybody has all their different anxieties. They have all their troubles and challenges, and they just really want to be heard. They want to feel appreciated. And that's the kind of space that I want to provide athletes, and a lot of times parents too. That's why people work with me. I also help the parents in their process of guiding their young athlete.
I like that a lot. And I like how You're talking about one of the things it's come up on the podcast quite a few times is just the power of asking questions and then asking those follow-up questions and like helping them articulate. And especially for like I work with a lot of young athletes. I know you kind of work with young athletes and professionals. You have a little bit of a mix. So I'm sure it might be a little bit different. But one of those important skills is to help these young people articulate what's going on. And it may not always be perfect. That's why I like that question of tell me more, so they can kind of get that practice of expanding on sharing that. Can you also kind of share like any practices that you encourage them and as far as like journaling, like in prompts and like other ways that you help them kind of dig deeper?
Yeah, I appreciate you mentioning that, Justin. So for us, we developed a Free Your Mind journal, and this is something that athletes across the whole world are using now, and it pretty much helps athletes recognize, first off, am I in the green or am I in the red, right? So if I'm in the green, that means I'm connected, I'm confident, I'm purpose driven. And if I'm in the red, I'm probably fear driven and I feel unsafe and I'm disconnected from my body. And then if I'm in the red, what do I need to do? And then in the book, I have a bunch of things, like I mentioned, like, okay, do I need a sip of water? Do I need some movement? Do I need some conscious breathing? Do I need to, you know, do whatever I need to do? So that's a part of the journal. So I think if athletes are regularly learning to check in with their body, be attuned to their body, and recognizing the physiological responses that are happening in their body as they go throughout their day, and they're triggered or whatever else, then they're going to be better able to regulate their system. And if they're regulating their system, they're going to be more receptive to, the information. So if a coach, for example, if you're running a timeout and I'm actually regulating my system, I'm regulated, then guess what? My brain's going to be more available to whatever you have to say. But if I don't have that skill of being regulated and I'm starting to shut down, and then now the coach is getting angry because I'm shutting down, well, guess what, man? You're probably not going to win that game. So that's the other thought that I had when I was going through my own process of, okay, what do I need to focus on? How can I help players connect the dots and execute, at a high level? So that's also part of it. But yeah, the journaling, I think, is a great daily practice that all athletes should try and be open to. And when you go through the process of journaling, we call it shadow work. So it's looking, as I said, like the repressed emotions, the stuff that you've been putting away that you don't want to talk about. I have prompts within the journal that athletes go about and they write down. And it's a journal for athletes, but also for coaches too. As I said, I've went through this inner work, and I continue to work on myself. And I think if you can really look at some of those questions, those prompts within the journal, you may uncover some limiting beliefs and then start to turn them into empowering ones, right? Like learn to channel your attention on the right things. Yeah, it's a back and forth.
Yeah, that's powerful. And I journal as well as a coach. And I feel like my biggest breakthroughs is when I realize I need to improve at X, right? Whether that's improve at giving people feedback, I need to improve on teaching them a jump shot, right? I'm kind of simplifying things, but I do notice that sometimes as people, like as a person, I can kind of fall into this rut of where I just I just show up. But when I'm doing my best work is when I'm showing up to be my like improve from the last time I coached. And so if I want my athletes to come and improve every time, I need to make sure that I'm demonstrating that I'm being authentic and vulnerable and having humility of like, oh, I messed up. I wish I did this better.
Absolutely. I think that takes a lot of courage, man, to make that call, right? To look at yourself and look at yourself in the mirror and say, hey, this can be better. And when the athletes see that you're doing that and you're showing up that way, it allows them to take that step. I'm a really big believer in modeling behavior.
100%. And so, yeah, I just I really want to go back to when you're talking about regulated, like a regulated athlete, because I feel like, I had a podcast conversation it's probably about a month ago now, based on when this episode drops. And it's with Vic Johnson. He does the Center for Justice and Healing Through Sport. So, similar work and almost like it's like a trauma informed way and like kind of helping coaches not like basically add trauma onto kids, not necessarily in terms of major things, but in terms of just, the verbal assaults and just constant yelling. Now, for the athletes that you work with, I'm sure they have some coaches that are like that. So how do you help those athletes who have, I guess you could say high strung coaches? I don't know how you want to kind of put them in a box, manage those emotions when a lot of times, right, I'm getting information from my parents. My parents are yelling at me, and then I have my friends are in the crowd, and now my coach is yelling at me, right? That's a lot of attention going elsewhere. So I can imagine that could be like some of the conversations you have with your athletes.
Yeah. I'd say most people don't know how to manage their own anxiety. And that's like, as I've done this work on myself and with the athletes, I've just recognized that more and more. Like, oh, well, they're just a little anxious today. Like I can feel it and see it. And I know that they're off centered. Where before I was like, oh, there must be something wrong with me. This is me messing this up for them. And now I'm trying to people please and like, help them with their anxiety. So that was something I had to work on. But I'd say with these athletes, there's a couple things to think about. The first thing is I try to give them the context. I try to make connections that are practical to their game. So a couple examples. What are some common examples within basketball, right, that we can focus on? One thing that nobody seems to talk about that always was something that I had to handle, and I'm sure you had to handle and your players are handling right now, is like when you sub into the game, like, do you have a routine? When you sub out of the game, like that's an excellent opportunity. And to me, that's life. Like when I leave something, what do I have to do? Anything that you do for the rest of your life, like think about all the different situations. I leave a team, or I leave a company, or I leave like a relationship. What do I have to do? At some point, I'm going to have to detach so that I can focus and be in the present moment and then create in that moment to develop my future. So when I sub out of the game, I think it's the same thing. I'm learning to detach. So we have something when athletes step off the floor, if their coach is really anxious or getting really upset or whatever, and we'll practice with the athletes. Like I'll put my hand on the shoulder and I'll look the athlete in the eyes and I'll be giving them feedback. I might start raising my voice just a bit and I'll cue them and I'll say, okay, as I'm doing this, can you feel your feet on the floor? Can you wiggle your toes? Can you press into your heels? Okay, so you're grounded. Okay, great. Can you balance your posture? Can you adjust your posture? Put your shoulders back, stand tall. Okay, great. Uncross your arms. Great. Can you continue to make eye contact with me as I'm speaking and nod your head? Okay. Right. So you're showing the coach that you're regulating. Guess what? A lot of times when the athlete regulates, what does the coach start to do? They start to co-regulate. So then I start to, oh, okay, cool. All right. I don't have to be so defensive and I can just have a normal conversation, So then what happens is they run to the end of the bench and then they have another moment to shake it off, to let go. A lot of athletes, like for my 20s, my whole 20s, people said, let it go, let it go. Why are you dwelling on this? Why is this something that keeps bothering you? Just let it go. And I'm like, I have no idea what that means. It didn't make any sense to me. So I studied that for a long time. But one of the things we'll do with the athletes is, shake your body out, move your body, jump up and down. And then once they do that, they breathe in, they breathe out. And they might do that once, twice, 3 times. And then they return to the bench, right? So you just airballed 3 shots in a row, or you turned the ball over when you shouldn't have. You're going through the process of letting that go, and bringing yourself back. And then when you sit on the bench, you're doing the same process you did with your coach, like, okay, sit down, ground, feel points of contact with the bench. Your sitting bones being supported by the bench, your spine being supported by the chair, Okay, you might need to stomp your feet again, wiggle your toes, press into your heels, and then you balance out your body again, uncross your arms, open yourself up. A lot of athletes, when they start to shut down, what happens to their body language? They roll their shoulders over, right? They get really small. This is the moment, this is the test. This is the freaking test, man. This is where you evolve to a whole nother level. You have all this stuff going on. And guess what you can do? you can open your heart, which is the toughest thing to do. As one of the, the great spiritual teachers that I've followed for the last 5 years, he talks about opening your heart in hell, Ram Dass. That's what you're doing as an athlete. And a lot of people, what they do, and I do it sometimes too, is you close that thing and you let nothing in because you don't want to get hurt and you don't want to experience pain. So when you sit on the bench, open yourself up. And then we'll do something with vision. So we'll use vision to regulate, because a lot of times when you're in fight or flight, your vision shuts down, it narrows. So we'll put both thumbs out. I don't know if you can see, both thumbs out like this, straight ahead, and then we'll look straight, and then we'll start to slowly widen, and where I can see my thumbs and my peripherals, right? We'll have different exercises that we'll play with for vision, but it's important to have a consistent routine that athletes can go to, and then it's the same thing. Like, I can take you through when they sub in. Like, when they sub in, I talk to our athletes all the time, especially our pro guys. Like, our head coach, man, he's amazing. Like, he's an amazing coach. He knows the game, and he's got a great feel, and he'll look at you. And if you have one hesitation, or, you get small for a second, he sees that, and he's going to lose trust in your ability to perform. So you have to be on your stuff. You have to be ready to perform. You got to do the work, but you got to present yourself that you're confident. Even if you're feeling a little shaky, you got to present yourself as confident. So an example would be like when the player steps on, gets called, right? They call the name to sub in. I'm going to freaking run to the bench or the scores table. I'm going to run to the scores table, and that's part of my activation. That's getting me back in my body. And then when I get to the scores table, I don't care about the scores people behind me. I want to be respectful, but I need to go through my process, and they may miss the game for 5 seconds, me doing this. So I'm going to jump up and down. So I'm going to do the same thing. I'm getting back in my body. I feel my feet, the vibration going through my body. I can feel that. Once I do that, then we take a powerful breath in through the nose, out through the mouth, do that twice. And then we return to normal nasal breathing deep in and out through my nose. As I breathe deeper into my lungs, what's happening in my body is the cooling, calming chemicals like dopamine and serotonin are being released, right? If I'm breathing through my chest and I'm breathing fast through my chest, you've got cortisol and adrenaline, filling your body. So just recognizing some basic things about human physiology is another way athletes start to be able to, regulate. We're giving them an education. And I think if we can work with the players and we can teach them these things about how to regulate their systems, man, that's going to really impact the game, because a lot of these players are going to become coaches or trainers. And, at a young age, if you can really cement these tools, form those grooves in the brain, I feel like, the game is going to continue to move forward.
100%. So just as a way, you just dropped a ton of wisdom. So I want to try and recap it. Like, I feel like the number one, you dropped a ton of tools on just how to become physically present, how to like relax, get out of fight or flight, right? You shared, different ways through the breath, right? Feeling your feet on the floor, right? Using a visual, right? With my thumbs, just to make sure I lock in. I'm getting out of my head. And it's like these activations ways of when the coach calls me, right? I'm sprinting to the bench so I can kind of start to get going. And then I take my deep breath and then I'm ready to go. So as a coach, like when I'm teaching some of this, is the best place, because I feel like games provide that opportunity of when you fail, how to reset, right? You're going to have to reset a lot. I'm curious, I feel like this is a good opportunity where we can almost build this into our practice, right? When you fail in practice, right? What is that? So can you give like some, kind of build on what you just said as some concrete examples of how coaches and even players that are listening to this can be like, okay, this is how I can practice it in practice. And then the game is the test. It's going to test my mental ability, which is a skill.
Yeah. I mean, ideally, first you have the coach introducing and giving some of the education on the physiology and those kind of things. I think that's really important. And then ultimately, as you go through the process, using cues, and giving the players opportunities to practice. I've worked with a few different coaches, and the challenge is always and I used to be like this all the time. Like, my practices would be chaos. Like, they'd be let me reword it. It'd be organized chaos. Like, I would get our players doing, these drills where it was fast and quick and they had to make all these decisions. And it was always like to the minute, we are on top of our stuff. And if we don't get it, that's all right. Come back to the next day. But so I think there's times and practices where we need to be able to slow down and understand that all learning, it doesn't have to happen in chaos. Like sometimes we need to slow down to process and try things. And I've done workshops for athletes all over the world, and that was some of the initial resistance. Like our practices need to be fast. And now as I slow it down, it seems like the athletes are getting worse, right? Because they're having to think a bit and experiment with the tools. So I think there's also like if you're interested in this kind of stuff, there's some patience that you need as a coach, but also as a player too. Like, it does take some work, some back and forth, because you're tuning into your body. And if you've never done that, if you've been numbed out to your body, yeah, man, it might take you, at least a month to start really seeing the progress that you want to see with it. So yeah, that's something simple. I think in terms of like failing in practice, is that the question? Like failing if I'm making mistakes and stuff like that?
Yeah, so just like opportunities, giving them opportunities to practice their, mental reset and practice.
Yeah. So I think you can start off just by cueing. And we say a lot of times, we'll say gear down. So gear down means like, hey, this is a dead ball. We're going into a timeout. This is your opportunity to go through your routine. So I would use that trigger word within practices or workouts. And ultimately, I'd start to back off and I'd cue less. And then I'd ask questions after and say, hey, like, were you able to, regulate when this happened? Or how was that for you when you went through that? Were you focused? Or, 1 to 10, what was your focus like today? Or how present were you? So I'd ask those questions after to check in and see if they felt like they were using their strategies. Because I think, Justin, like as we move forward with coaching, it seems like a lot of people are they're leaning into scaling their businesses, and I'm all for it. Like if you want to, make money and build your business, I'm doing the same thing. I'm building my business. But I think also recognizing that, man, what works for you, Justin, may not work for me. So like I can give you like 15 different tools in the moment about how to handle failure, but that may not click. And that's part of the patience of being in the mental performance coach, or in the more mental performance coaching, or just a basketball coach in general. So what I'd say is that the key concept, the underlying foundation to this whole thing is, are you giving your athletes opportunities to have conversations, to figure out what's helpful? What are they already doing? Like some athletes already may have a few things that they already do and that has helped them find flow or perform at high levels. And they just aren't as aware that, hey, when I did that, what, this actually really helped me. Maybe that's what we need to do and focus. Instead of introducing new tools, increasing the frequency of their consistent routines, or, using, I don't know, mantras or breath work techniques. And then there may be athletes that just have no idea where to start. They've never had success. Then you can start making suggestions, as I've said a few times.
100%. Yeah, I like how you kind of just guide them, right? Help guide them. Provide a space where whether I find that when I'm working with them, I also we work in a small tight gym, and then a lot of times we're sharing the gym. So I feel like if we can get our group in a classroom or a quieter setting and give them that opportunity and space, whether they're journaling about it or they're partner sharing, it's an opportunity for them to really think about, okay, when I scored 30 points this game, or when I had 10 rebounds this game, this is what I did before the game. And this is kind of my mindset. And so just kind of helping guide them along. And then we can, like you said, provide them with a little bit of a menu. Like, is this something you can explore?
Absolutely. That's what I say all the time. The menu is the key, That's what we did with our athletes, with our professional team this summer. Like I gave them, 5 or 6 pregame meditations that I did with them in person. But at the end, the guys that have been, because our season's so short, so we don't have a ton of time. But for the guys that started at the very beginning, I was able to say at the end, okay, how do you feel today? Like, what do you really need? Okay, this is what I need. Okay, well, what do you think about doing this meditation? Let's do it. Boom. And then we'd bang it out. And then, the athlete would perform and do what they do. So that's, man, that's That's the key, man. It's like I just think about myself, and I'm a pretty stubborn individual, and I think anytime anybody's really pushing something on me, I've just always had resistance. So I'd rather someone help guide me than push anything onto me. That's just my personality, and maybe that's why I coach the way I coach.
Like that a lot, and I feel similarly, and that's why I try and almost coach in that way in some aspects of just basketball. But now I kind of have this perspective on how I can do it and help them with their mental game as well. It's not like you have to do this rigid 10-minute meditation or visualization before the game, right? It's kind of guiding because each athlete is different, right? As me and you both know, like on your professional team, each athlete that you work with at the high school level is different. So it's really helping guide them. And I feel like that's what really helps them in the long run become more self-aware people, and then that self-awareness can then drive those changes, whether they're in college as an athlete or whether they're working at a restaurant and they have to figure out how to be a better waiter, right? Just having those different self-awareness skills. So as we kind of enter the final 2 minutes of our conversation, I'd love for you to just drop your final bit of wisdom for the parents, coaches, athletes that are listening to this podcast that really want to kind of take those next steps in playing free.
Yeah, I'd say it's the same challenge that I face is like we try to do this by ourselves. And I think ultimately, if you're going to be successful as a parent, if you're going to be successful as a coach or an athlete, I think you need a strong community around you, people that build you up, people that can hold space for you, people that you can talk to. And that ultimately is going to inspire you to take the action you need to take. And that's what I try to do for our athletes. So whether it's play free basketball or working with another coach, I definitely consider having somebody in your corner that can help you with these tools. Like that to me is the journey. Like what are we really trying to do here? And I think the more I've asked myself that question and said, why? Why am I doing this? Why am I doing this? And you just keep asking yourself why. The core of what I get to every single time is that I'm on this journey and I'm just trying to be a little bit better. I want to try things. I want to experiment. I want to learn more about myself. And how I've learned more about myself is having really cool people around me to push me and to challenge me and to be open to experimenting with some of these ideas. So that's the back and forth I think that I've been on, and I think a lot of people like yourself are figuring out as well.
Absolutely. I mean, that's actually been one of my big realizations as well recently is like, if I want to grow BTG basketball and beyond the scoreboard, I need a team to help me do it. For the longest time, like I was almost shut in, like I was just so laser focused and thought I could only do it myself. And ever since I've kind of like let that guard down and it started inviting people in to help me, like I've just noticed it growing so much more. And so if we can do that ourselves, and then we can teach our athletes how to do it themselves as well, it's really powerful. So I really appreciate all the wisdom you shared with us today. Where can people find your book? Where can people find your courses? And where can people follow you on social media to get all this wisdom on a consistent basis?
Yeah, the best place, Justin, for people to reach out to me is going to be on playfreeball.com. And basically, you'll input your information. You can sign up for our free webinar and you can book a call with me if you're interested in any of the stuff that we talked about today. At the same time, from that place, because I have your contact information, I can forward resources to you, like different meditations that we've done, or if you're interested in getting the journal, I have a link for that you can purchase it, whether it be ebook or I think a lot of people really enjoy being able to write out in paper. So that's the place, playfreeball.com.
Thank you for sharing your wisdom today. Definitely will have to look into getting a journal and a book for myself and my athletes. So I'm looking forward to staying connected. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Beyond the Scoreboard podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, make sure that you subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts and share it with a friend, coach, or parent you feel like would get value from this episode. It's our responsibility to impact as many parents and coaches who are the ones that are impacting our athletes. That's how we create a ripple effect. So thank you for being a part of our community, and we look forward to serving you all next week.